Hi, everyone. I am so excited about another guest that we're going to have. I always want you to know all the people in the world that are out there to help you and to parents too. I find it fascinating how many people there are out there to help. And so I want you to know that there are so many people on your side. I have Monica Crnogorac with me, and she is going to be talking to us about teen anxiety because that's what she also works with too. But I want to tell you a little bit more about her first, and then she can tell us all about her story. Monica is a certified life and wellness coach specializing in helping teens and young adults conquer feelings of overwhelm and anxiety that hinder their daily lives. Whether it's academic pressure, relationship struggles, or career uncertainties, Monica provides the guidance needed for transformative change. Drawing from her battles with anxiety, she understands the challenges firsthand, and she has dedicated herself to acquiring the tools and knowledge necessary to empower others on their journey to resilience and confidence. And I love that so much. That's beautiful. So I want you to start with us telling us a little bit about yourself and tell us about those battles that you had with anxiety and how that formed this business with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited for you guys to tune in and to hear more about me and Cynthia's story. My own personal experiences with anxiety really started in middle school. And when I was in middle school, I didn't have the awareness to know that what I was experiencing was anxiety. And it really had to do with, physical reactions that were happening that was creating like a little bit of resistance for me to go to school physically.
Mm,
So I started to get like stomach aches, was getting nauseous, was, again, not wanting to go to school, where I ended up being in and out of school for a month. And I noticed that it was very situational. So and again, these are things that I'm noticing in hindsight, not in the moment. But whenever my mom would drop me off to school, I would get triggered and all those feelings would come up because that was just my body's way of signaling that I wasn't comfortable with going to school. And, what had started first as a stomach flu, which I thought that I had, turned into going into the doctor's office because my parents didn't really know what was going on.
mm,
And I remember being in the doctor's office and the doctor looking at me and saying, we've asked you questions, everything seems okay. Is there a possibility that there's something going on in school that you're skipping? And in that moment, I didn't know, like I was like, me skipping school, like because I'm anxious, like it didn't really add up for me, right? But that planted a seed in my head for something that I've never forgotten ever since. And so not knowing how to handle those feelings and not knowing how to overcome them really motivated me to become a teen life coach now.
mm,
Because when I was a teen, I never really knew who to confide in. I
mhm.
know how hard it is to find someone to talk to. I know how hard it is to not let the voice inside of your head make you feel very like small, inadequate, not enough. But I also now know a life where fear and self-doubt doesn't stop you from taking action in the direction that you want to go. And so this really inspired me to work with this age range because building the awareness for someone, it can give them and equip them with the right tools and resources so anxiety doesn't really stop them or hinder in their daily lives.
Oh my gosh. So, can you pinpoint now what you were trying to avoid about school? Like, what was the trigger?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think what had happened, and again, looking back to it, I mean, it's not small. It wasn't small then. It seems smaller now. But
Mhm.
basically, what had happened was I had a friend who I was close with, and I had confided a secret in her
Mm,
about, like, I think it was a crush that I had. And that secret and that rumor went out. And I think it was a little bit misconstrued. And so
mhm,
having people know my secret and then not knowing how people were reacting to it, definitely I got in my head and it stopped me from going to school. And I think it was different levels of variables that contributed to it. It wasn't just that one event, but what it looked like was I think there was a level of bullying involved.
mhm,
And I was very nervous to go back. And I remember like teachers would call me and see what was going on, or my friends would try to say like, hey, let's go out to like recess or let's go out. But it would be one of those things where I would try and I would get stuck in my head and I just couldn't do it. And so it was towards the end of the year. And this was grade 6. We have like this EQAO testing where for like a couple days, everyone goes into testing. I missed it. It was something that I just could not face, going back. And it wasn't until the following year, I don't necessarily remember what happened, but I think it was just time away from school in the summer that really allowed me to just say, okay, like this is no longer as intense as it was. Nobody really kind of remembers what's going on. Like I am ready to go back and no longer let this like stop me.
Mm-hmm. So then, did you have any other incidents come up then in high school where like those kinds of feelings came back up again, or it was just like kind of like the intensity of that time was just too much?
I think the most intensity of that time was middle school. But what I started noticing in university more when I devoted myself to self-growth journey was my thoughts and my belief system that was really bringing out my anxiety. And a lot of my mentality was in the victim mindset of,
Hmm.
why is this happening to me? This is not fair, right? Like I was asking
Hmm.
myself questions that weren't empowering and that were
Right.
keeping me stuck in that victim mindset. And that in and of itself was causing fear. And the biggest
Hmm.
thing for me was I was believing those thoughts to be true.
Hmm.
And when I wasn't aware of that, like, thoughts come and go, it doesn't necessarily define your reality.
Hmm.
Because I didn't know that, it was like intensifying those feelings of fear, doubt, all these anxious thoughts. And it was actually making them worse. And I
Yes.
remember I was tuning into one of the things that you posted on your Instagram, and you had said like, when you don't allow those thoughts in, when you don't say, hi, anxiety, how are you? Like, what's going on? It actually intensifies it. And it's almost like the way I see it, it's like you're feeding a monster that's getting bigger. And
Yes.
until you allow yourself to welcome in those thoughts
Hmm.
and maybe, find a way to reframe them in a way that is true, it's going to keep you in that loop that was not helping me at all.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And what is so fascinating to me is I was trained in mental health to work with kids at school all those years. And I didn't realize the whole idea of your thoughts create how you feel until like 6 years ago. And I learned that through life coaching. I did not learn that in my counseling training, which is so crazy to me. And so I know I've been trained hours and hours and hours with a master's degree on mental health, and yet I did not know that. And we're not
Mhm.
teaching kids that. And so that's kind of like my journey too. Like, I want teens to know this. This is so important. This is life changing. This is stuff that is going to get them out of so many like thought loops and stuckness that they feel where they can actually be these full, amazing people that they
Mhm.
are supposed to be, but they limit themselves with these thoughts that they think are true. Like it's just
Absolutely.
so crazy. And so I'm so glad that there are more people out there doing this because every teen needs to know this.
Mhm.
And the school, even though they're maybe being a little bit better about trying to teach some of these things, they're not ever going to go full in on it because they're so worried about math and science and social studies. And not that those things are not important, but we're not spending enough time teaching kids how to be themselves. And because if they felt good about that, all the other stuff would fall into place, I think.
Yes, and having that awareness is, like you said, it's life changing. They're simple, effective practices that you really integrate daily or whenever you're triggered in a way where you don't attach yourself to it and it doesn't
Mhm.
define your reality, right? And when you don't know, you don't know. And
Yeah.
that's where you say the importance of actually teaching teens that, because there was this level of like, and I remember when I was listening to podcasts because I felt so alone in it, where I was listening to someone and I said to myself, oh my God, I'm not the only one. And
Yeah.
this is something that's, I don't want to say very close to universal in the sense where everyone experiences to one degree or the other,
Mhm.
some more intense than others. But it's like when you know that it's something that everyone goes through,
Hmm.
it normalizes it validates your experience, and it makes you feel like, okay, like if they went through it and they overcame it, then I can too. And how can I get there? Because I'm tired of this stopping me
Yeah.
or running my show.
Oh, exactly. Well, you mentioned strategies. So what are some of the strategies that you use or the ones that you teach the people that you work with?
I think a big thing to, overcoming your anxiety is recognizing your inner dialogue,
Hmm.
which is, can be referred to self-talk. And I remember in my own personal experiences, I had a lot of negative self-talk, and it significantly, influenced my levels of anxiety because it reinforced those feelings of self-doubt, inadequacy, worthlessness, whatever you want to call it. And I noticed that when you constantly engage in that negative self-talk, you internalize those critical or those pessimistic thoughts about yourself, which wears your self-esteem down, or it hinders your ability to pursue your goals. So an effective strategy for that is really to start practicing positive affirmations and cognitive reframing. So
Hmm.
it's recognizing that when a thought comes in or when a negative belief arises, is to challenge it. And one simple tool that I found to be very effective is to even ask yourself, how true is this thought?
Hmm.
Like that one simple question will just like bring you back down to kind of center to figure out, okay, how real is this?
Right.
And then what I find is really reframe it in a way that you know to be true. So a simple exercise that I, have suggested the teens that I've worked with is almost whether you want to do it on a daily practice or whatever kind of works right well for you, is keep track of the negative thoughts that come up. If you feel comfortable reframing it in the spot, great. But if you need more time to kind of like figure out what sounds better, keep track of it in like a journal or on your phone. And then when you come home on the left-hand side, write down all the negative thoughts that you had. Let's say, for example, it was like, I'm not good enough, or I'm not capable of doing well on this test. And then on the right side, reframe it in a way that you know to be more true. For example, if it's I'm not capable of doing well on this test, I am, or I will take the action needed to make me feel confident in the goal that I'm trying to achieve.
Hmm.
And really what it's doing is it's getting you to challenge that negative thinking, and it's fostering a level of a growth mindset
Hmm.
where again you're able to counteract that negative thought and then move towards like the next steps that you need to take.
Hmm. And I have noticed that even just adding one word to something like the word yet. So I always give the example, I can't do this. Even if you say, I can't do this yet,
Mm-hmm.
is just that tiny bit of difference that makes your brain think, oh, but I could do it, or I might be able to do it. Like just like a glimmer of hope, kind of that, it isn't as finite, I cannot do this. It's, oh, well, maybe I could do it.
Mm-hmm.
And, I haven't learned, one skill yet that I need to get to wherever it is. So I think sometimes if it seems too hard to change, just like putting one extra word in there or just like some little caveat of it's possible that you could do this. And I think that that is so important. And I talk a lot of to my clients about looking at their thoughts, looking what the patterns are. What do you typically get down on yourself about? And then those are the ones that we kind of want to start picking things apart. Have you read The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer?
Yes, it's one of my top books. It's
I
something that I
know.
could go back to because there's so much goodness in there.
There
Um,
is.
and one thing that I think it was from the Untethered Soul that really was a strategy that helped me was becoming the backseat driver to your thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Analogies are a big one for me. They work
Yes.
very well, but he mentioned the idea of like, okay, envision like you are in the back seat and your thoughts are in the front seat. And what the intention of that is to get you to unattach from your thoughts
Mm-hmm.
and see them as separate from you, because when you're able to see them as separate, like one, you have a different perspective. And
Mhm.
two, you recognize, okay, like this is not a part of me.
Right. Yeah, and he also talks about personifying your thoughts as a character or a person. He calls it the inner roommate. And I
Mm-hmm.
did an activity with a whole class one time where we picked a character that our thoughts are, and so then whenever those negative thoughts come in, we imagine that character saying those things. And then that
Mm-hmm.
also separates you from it because you're picturing this cartoon character, anime character, superhero, I don't know, whatever you want it to be. I don't necessarily like it to be a monster just because I don't want to make this like good bad. I want to make it like, to normalize it that everybody
Right.
has these thoughts and it's not bad to have them. It's just almost really more annoying. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I've
Mm-hmm.
made my character sometimes has been, oh gosh, I'm going to forget her name now, but the grandma on Downton Abbey who was so snooty, and if you don't watch Downton Abbey, you wouldn't know who it was, but
Mm-hmm.
she's like super prudish and like just a snooty person. And I always, my voice says mean things to me like a snooty person would be like, well, of course I don't like you, or of course you're never going to get this right, or whatever. And so then it makes it almost comical in a way. Sometimes I'm like, oh, yeah, that person's telling me this. And it's not. And I told my clients that because we hear the voice in our own, the thoughts in our own voice, it feels so true. Like this is the truth. And when we make it a different character and it has a different voice sometimes, then it's like, oh, well, that's not really as painful as I thought, or that's not as true as I thought it was. My daughter always said her inner voice was an older British man who smoked a pipe.
Oh, that's funny.
And
That's
so, and
really
she
funny.
thought of that like a long time ago. And that's probably how she got through some of her anxiety. Like she came up with techniques to help herself when, she wasn't really taught them. It was just like a survival instinct that she had come up with this character. But that totally makes sense. So, what do you have for our listeners today? Like what do you want to offer them and how tell us a little bit about that and how can they find you and get to know what you're doing?
Yeah, I think I want everyone to know again, and we touched a little bit on this, is that anxiety is normal. It happens to everyone. And again, as long as you have that awareness of it and your intention is to overcome it, you can always find the support that you need in order to overcome it. And I think what I want, especially teens to know is once you realize it's starting to hinder your daily life, whether it be again like in a relationship, with a career, even in goal setting, like that is when, it may kind of signify to you that there's something going on and let's figure out, what the next steps are. And another kind of strategy that I wanted to touch base on and that I will kind of offer like as a little bit of a freebie is how anxiety can influence goal setting, because sometimes when we deal with anxiety, it can cause teens to set overly ambitious goals or unrealistic goals. And sometimes it could lead to an avoidance of goal setting
Mm,
altogether due to
mhm,
those feelings of overwhelm and self doubt. So, really, if you're a teen listening and you're struggling with, setting and achieving goals, a tip for you is to really break down those large goals into more smaller, manageable steps and to celebrate your progress along the way. And even from a parent perspective, when you see your teen, taking little small steps is to acknowledge and validate, like, hey, like, I see how devoted you are. Like, that's awesome. I'm very proud of you. And again, like there's two ways to look at this. When goals are too small, it feels too easy, which could impact a level of drive that someone has because it's just like, okay, I'm done. It's quick. It's not challenging. But
mhm.
when goals are too large, it feels too overwhelming and out of reach, which stops people from taking action. So, what I really want to encourage teens is to set a realistic goal that still feels like a challenge and motivates you to take the next step. And this will go a little bit, in align with the worksheet. But what I like to do is to take teens through a little bit of an exercise. So I ask them first, okay, what is the smallest thing you can do? What is the most minimum? Okay.
Mhm.
And then I look at what is the maximum? And then it's asking yourself, what is that middle realistic stretch?
Mm,
which helps them come to that even middle balance. And once they know what that middle realistic stretch is, the exercise then continues to set them up for success, like asking them, okay, what does that first step look like?
mm,
And the intention of this exercise is to really help teens clarify their goal and motivates them to take action because they know exactly what they want and how to get there.
mm-hmm,
And my last suggestion that I really want people to know is when you're anxious, we tend our bodies respond physically,
mm-hmm,
whether it's increased heart rate, usually increased breath, which feels like, your breathing is getting more shallow. And a
mm-hmm,
simple thing that I know, Cynthia, you will agree with is the power of breath work,
mm-hmm.
because it's one thing that we can control and manipulate.
Yes.
So when you feel yourself getting anxious, like take the time to really center yourself. And a strategy that I recommend is box breathing.
Mm,
So really, as you inhale, pause, and exhale, you're choosing a number of seconds that remains the same across the board, and you're visualizing yourself creating a box. As you inhale, as you pause and go across, as you exhale and go down, and you're doing that a couple times, or really up until you feel like you're kind of more calm.
mm-hmm,
And then from there, you can approach your situation and your challenge from a much better position than if you're super anxious, worked up, and like really your mind's running in a circle.
mm-hmm. Well, and when our bodies go into that panic mode, our brains start shutting down the thinking part. And
Exactly.
so that's why we just kind of get out of control because we can't think about what we need to do anymore. And so keeping our body in at least a semi-calm state with box breathing or other things that we use to really calm our central nervous system is what we're trying to do, then the thinking part of our brain can stay online and then we can think through what our next steps are. It's really hard to think about next steps if part of our brain isn't working. And,
Absolutely.
kids don't realize that when they're in that anxiety, panicked state, part of their brain isn't working. And really, parents and I've seen teachers and principals not understand this, like yelling at kids who are dysregulated, that's not helping them. They're not
Mm-hmm.
even understanding what you're talking about or asking them, why did you do this? Or you need to do this other thing. Well, their brain isn't even working in the capacity where they could choose to do what they're supposed to do or where they need to go or whatever. So, yeah, knowing that is so important. So, you're going to have a worksheet for our teens to like figure out some goal setting for them and like what's the next steps for that. And then you have something for parents too.
Yeah, I do. So for parents, a little bit of a checklist, or it's like a list of like conversation starters or things you can say to empower your teen, or the differences in having like anabolic and catabolic conversations. So, the idea of what sounds motivating and empowering for your child, and the opposite, what kind of shies them away and does not give them the support that they're looking for. So really it's also building parents' awareness around them, around that, and
Mm-hmm.
then having these little questions or tips that they could use to create that open dialogue with their teen. Because I sometimes find, or I've heard, that parents do struggle with that. So these questions are a way to kind of open that door and to approach it in a more gentle and loving way, to see how that can have an impact on the level of conversation between parent and teen.
Because the connection is so important. Like that's key to helping any of these situations. And I think that sometimes parents kind of need some conversation starters or, how do I, because a lot of times there has been some disrepair in the relationship because if there's been a lot of turmoil with this anxiety and panic, and maybe the kid doesn't want to go to school or they're, having a lot of problems and the parents are just fed up with it. Like, it's just like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. This would help them to start repairing that relationship because that's the only way they're going to get back to really finding some real relief for them and relief for their
Mm-hmm.
teens too. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's wonderful. And I'm going to put all that stuff in the show notes. And I am so glad that you were with us and able to share your expertise and advice with our listeners because it's so important. I really want every teen to have a life coach. And we all, there's just too many teens in the world. We need lots of people doing this work. And so I want
Yeah.
my listeners to know there's lots of people out there that can help them. Is there anything else that you want our audience to know before we're done today?
Yeah, I think the last thing that I want them to know is that, when you become a student of what you're going through and you become open to trying new things out, you become that much more likely and closer to uncovering a solution.
Mm,
So we all know that, like, in order to really get to the other side, you may have to kind of look at things that make you afraid. You
mhm,
may have to kind of, like, let's call it like the darkness, right?
mhm,
But at the same time, it's not as scary, and
mhm,
it's actually very empowering, and it teaches you a lot about yourself. And when you're able to see and understand that what you're going through is actually a learning opportunity, you become that much more likely to want to be that student.
mhm.
So really, I want teens to know that, again, like, encourage them, get the support you need, ask yourself empowering questions that get you out of victim mode, and know that you can overcome it, and you have the tools that you need in order to not let this define you.
Yeah, I love that so much. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been very helpful, and it also just makes me feel good to hear you're saying the exact words that I say all the time, and I just know that this message is going to get to more and more people.
And thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It's always great to connect with like-minded people who are doing the same work. And like you said, there's a lot of big value in having conversations. And I really hope this message just reaches someone who, might not realize that what they're going through, a lot of people are going through as well.
I know. I always say that we hear the message when we're ready to hear it. So
Hmm.
whoever accidentally listened to this today is they needed to hear it.
Absolutely. I do agree.
Thank you.
No problem.